I found myself with a few extra minutes today and thought I would just talk briefly about research. What are primary sources? This is a tricky one. Obviously, a primary source when you're talking about the medieval world is literally old documents that go back to whatever time period you're looking at, whether it's the Templar historic period of 1120 to 1307, which is the accepted norm, and then the following trials up through 1312 or 14, depending on whose timeline you're following. So you're looking for a document that is written in medieval Latin or medieval French. Um, English at that juncture, even in England, didn't exist as such. English actually was not formally adopted until the reign of King James the First. He wanted to create an English identity, and that is why Old English was basically brought forward at that time. And to get away from the French language, which is the language of the English courts, due to the French kings having invaded England in 1066, and ousting the prior culture, which was Saxon, a mix of Germanic and Romano-Britons. So the looking for primary sources is important for those researchers who have not been classically trained, such as somebody who has been trained to read medieval French, medieval Latin. If you've not been trained to do that, and it's very difficult, it's not an easy task, and you've got to be able to interpret the scribe's handwriting as well, which, like any doctor, is sometimes difficult to read. Uh, it's challenging. So what researchers usually do, if they're wealthy, they can hire an expert who can read those documents, or you rely upon the translations of a highly academic person who has studied the said document in question. That then becomes a second source. There are very few researchers who can read medieval Latin. These individuals who can read medieval Latin, medieval French, go to school for many years so that they know what they're looking at when they look at those documents. So don't be fooled. Now, some things can be readily translated by modern technology, but you still have the nuance of phrasing and the context of the day to consider, the lens of the time in which it was written. So we are all reading from secondary sources, and perhaps even third. So it's not easy when we know that 90% of our secular documents from the medieval era are gone. So be careful when somebody says that they're proud to always refer to primary sources. Primary sources become much easier to obtain when you're talking about, say, the reign of King James I going forward, because it's more recent. And but going back further, it gets very difficult. Uh, when you're looking at, say, for example, Royston Cave, the issue with that is that Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville, and I'll put a link in my comment section below pertaining to that individual, and his wife were highly involved in the creation of Royston Cave. And I know this for multiple reasons that do date back to the historic period of which we're talking about, which was the Templar active period in the 1100s. Um, When you're missing primary sources, you have to look at other avenues, such as his wife's name, Sir Joffrey de Mandeville's wife's name, can be modernly said to be Roysia, uh, Roysia's town, or Royston. And the first few letters of her name mean king, and it became feminized by SIA. And going back further to the day, indications show that her name may have been Rose or some form of Rohes, Old English, Rohese. So that's when things start to get challenging, because then you're looking at Old French that has flowed into Old English. So it's not cut and dry. We have evidence such as going back of who was involved in Royston, the town itself. And the town of Royston existed long before the period of James the First. And the first few letters that are identifiable with it are R.O. Now we know Geoffrey de Mandeville invested heavily in Royston itself, and it's possible he and his wife are depicted in the floor of Royston Cave. I should have gotten this out earlier. This is off the cuff, and I have found myself with some extra time. So, again, this is very off the cuff. So on the floor of Royston Cave, you've got a really interesting etched diagram. Now, this is not my own photograph. I had to use historic for that. Oh, this is hard to do backwards. I'm so sorry. Thank you for your patience. Okay, this is a carving in the floor of Royston Cave that's very difficult. Do you see her dress? It's straight. This is not the garment of a woman from the Elizabethan era or the Stuart era. And he is wearing a surcoat with hose that would have been worn during the medieval era. And this, he might even be wearing chainmail. This is evidence of patronage of the time in which I believe Royston Cave was carved, which is the 1100s. So here you have Geoffrey de Mandeville, who is known to have given money and property to Royston, the Augustinians, but he was also a favorite of the Templars and rode with them. So his wife's name is a variation of R.O., either Rose, Rosia, Rohes, or Roysia, from which the town gets its name. So here you have a carving in the floor that is often missed, and she's wearing appropriate clothing for that medieval time period. The so you have to go to other sources for your information. You have to know what people, if you can't access an actual document, what were people wearing at the time? What is the basic outline? What was the armor of the day? What were the swords like? What were the shields like? What are local legends? Now, certainly James the First, he stamped himself on that town and he took it over and he developed it. But that town has always been a royal stopover before, when coming from the north or going to the north, because it's on an old Roman road, and they maintained that Roman road, just like the Portuguese did with the Roman roads that they inherited and maintained, and that technology was taken to Oak Island. That stone wharf on Oak Island dates to 1200s. So what's interesting about that, as a side note, is we cannot say for certain that the technology strictly comes from Portugal. Now, it was the first Templar nation, but what I'm saying is they probably had other nation kingdoms represented with them. The Templars at that juncture in 1200 were strong. They were brothers without borders, and they were everywhere. So they could have. I'm envisioning the activity on Oak Island as being a mix of individuals on those ships from Portugal who were French and who were, because it was actually the first king of Portugal, who was raised by Templar related individuals, was the nephew of Bernard de Clairvaux, who was a mastermind behind the order, and he of course is French. So they would have had a combination of different uh, ethnic backgrounds from across their Templar kingdom. So, but no doubt the Portuguese were huge importance. But getting back to what is a primary source, the further back you go, the harder it is to get them. What's interesting about Royston is that there is a source that's quoted as having been taken from the close rolls of 1356. But the original document is gone. But you have a individual who's highly educated and may have had access to the original document that is now gone. So, it's I know this is convoluted, but when you're missing a primary source, and most primary sources going back to the time of the Templars, 1100, 1200, they're gone. 1300, they're gone. The later you get, 1600s, okay, it's getting better. 1700s, yeah, it is getting better. 1800s, no doubt. But you go back any further, and you've got to look at a variety of different evidences. I brought up in my last video the axe. The axe was not in use. The sacred holy axe, when it comes to Royston Cave, was not used past a certain point. This is a Crusader emblem, or I should say a Templar emblem. So this is in my last video as well. Uh, so there's the sacred axe. And this is a carving that's repeated in Royston Cave 3 times. When I was there, I found 2 more that they didn't know they had. So it looks like an umbrella, but if you were to do some digging or find Sylvia Beeman's book, she was given permission by the Israeli government to use a photograph from an early 1960s archaeology dig and a photograph of a Templar grave in the Holy Land in one of their castles, where you will see that axe. And the upright means that it is almost like a doorway. It represents the human being. On one side of that axe, it means that you have died and been saved on the other side. So you've experienced a form of resurrection, which the Templars were emulating to be closer to Christ. In Royston Cave, there is a tomb, if you will. It's a raised area of stone where you lay in, contemplate your demise, and are raised into a new life. So here I am, I'm discussing with you why Royston is medieval and not dated to the time of James the First. So when you're losing primary sources, and there's evidence to show that Royston goes all the way back. Those first 2 letters, R-O, is documented in one way or another going back to Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville's wife and his mother of the same name. So you have to look at carvings. What were people wearing? Their armor, and also their this has been, I believe, misdated. This is not a shield. that I'm going to show you next from my book here. Um, if I can find it. Thank you for sticking with me. Okay, so you see this. This is actually a carving that was found in Scotland, and this is associated with Templar graves. Now, that is not this carving you will find twice in Royston. It's not a round shield that would have become in use in later centuries. It's the floor plan of the Holy Sepulchre, which they would have encountered, Templars would have encountered in the Holy Land. A few miles up the road in Cambridge is the round church, was built at the same time as Royston. So you have a below ground church, and then you have your above ground circular church on the same road. And on that same road, you have the Templar church in Baldock. That was their market town that they built. So these structures, you have Royston Cave, Round Tower Church in Cambridge, and further south you have the Baldock Church and Market Town, were all built at the same time by the same hands, and they were Templar related. So what you're looking at there is a floor plan, not a shield. Those shields came about. They're smaller. They were meant for a different type of sword, and that type of a shield is not going to help you with a broadsword. So there are other ways of dating. If you don't have that original document that says Sir Joe Smith of the Templar Knight Order built Royston Cave, you're not going to find that. And hence the mystery around Royston. But there are other ways of discerning when that may have been built. So I hope that helps. There are when you're about to lose a document, what do you do as a human being? You copy it. And this is time immemorial. The same with all of the books of the Bible. They were copied, and altered along the way to suit the hoped for melding of culture. So humanity is can be incredibly wise, but also to suit what their needs are at that time, they make changes. So you will find a very bright Victorian era scholar and into the 30s who has copied a document that's falling apart. And the Victorians were very exacting. I can only imagine what it must have been like as a scholar or even a composer of music to have to form in your mind what it is you're going to write about so as not to waste paper. And making mistakes is a luxury we have today that they did not have, unless they were very, very wealthy and backed by a very wealthy patron, such as a king. So if you make a mistake, then you're going to pay for it or be taken to task for it through waste of paper. So memory and copying exactly for the sake of science as they knew it at the time in the 1800s was incredibly important. So there were documents that were copied at that time of the late 1800s into the early 20th century, where the mindset would have been of integrity, exactness, because they knew the value of history. Today we have delete, we have autosave, we have such luxuries of that software has given us that they did not have the capacity at that juncture to have. So it's far more complex. So when an author says I've got direct from the source, my suggestion to you is look at their bio online, their bio. Did they study? Did they study? Now that doesn't mean that one can't self-study, but when you're going to master medieval French and medieval Latin in the written word and be able to read it, we're talking some serious training, and you can do that, but you're going to be investing a couple of years of your life to do it. So, so I'm asking you to be discerning, and primary sources are possible up to a point. So be discerning when somebody says, yeah, we've got it right here. Um, there is always another way to find out and put a story together. And this is how in the criminal world detectives work. Okay, well, we're missing the smoking gun. What is the supporting evidence around this particular piece of information that we're trying to get to the bottom of? So this is very off the cuff. I hope this makes sense. And any researcher that has truly studied Old French, medieval Latin, or Old English, and back further, the Saxon language is not a spoken language today. Very few people can read it. Very few people can actually speak it. So, and you yourselves, if you were to encounter someone speaking medieval English, Anglo-Saxon English, you wouldn't understand a word they were saying. You'd barely understand what the Queen Elizabethan court was saying in the 1500s into the 1600s, the language of Shakespeare. So it's not as easy as some people portray it to be. Anyway, I'll quit going on. I've been chattering like this away at you, and I hope this helps you in your own quest to get to the bottom of medieval mysteries and Oak Island. And just, a word of support on their behalf. Everything they pull out of the ground, it might not be shiny, but it's a piece of the story. And all theorists have to shift their narrative as they bring up information. I've had to, they've developed the concept that there are caches away from the money pit. And I believe my 2018 theory was that there was an offside chamber. But at that juncture, I wasn't thinking that there were other caches on the island, which is what the drilling down episodes are now saying. There's so much they have pulled out of the ground that leads to a presence on the island in the Templar historic period and generational treasure input, and certainly of high value, cultural, sacred, uh, philosophical, informative, and you have to know what they thought and were thinking in order to unravel what's happening on Oak Island. So I'm excited about season 11. I'm excited about going forward, and things that I have not conceived of that are happening that are mind blowing. And so I just want to acknowledge that all researchers have to shift their narrative. There was so little archaeology that was coming out of the ground in 2018 when I did my interview with them, that I even conceived that perhaps, and with my investigative partner at the time, that maybe they weren't actually domesticating the island because there was no archaeology at the time to really support that. The Templars were there, other than the megalithic boulders of the Nolan Cross. and other indications, of course, and his the Vikings coming into the area, which I've also discussed. I'll try to remember. I'll put those that information down below too. So at the time I thought, well, maybe, to keep things secret, they were trying to live on the ship and create a sacred environment and not a sacred slash domestic environment, because there wasn't any domestic waste to be had at that juncture. So maybe they wanted it to keep it clean, a clean footprint. Anything that they'd dropped maybe had been picked up by the indigenous peoples who lived there, took it away, they traded it. But definitely they were not staying on the ships in order to keep the site clean and free from evidence so that others coming after them would not look for a sacred vault, and thus lose their Solomon's temple on the island. So I hadn't meant to go into this to that extent, but all of us with new information have to shift our narrative, because that's otherwise it's fantasy and denial. You have to change with the evidence. So what's happening on Lot 5 is really exciting and off the chain. Off the chain. Go back and watch the drilling down episodes if you can. The amount of information is astonishing. But I just wanted to talk about primary sources and what you have to do if you aren't trained. And any theorist who says, yeah, I've got a primary source and I can read medieval Latin, medieval French, some of them probably can, but I'd sure like to see the certificate. I'd like to see the university education, the time they spent on it, etc. Or, acknowledge that they hired somebody to translate it. And that's not cheating. That is accurate. That is how it's done. Nobody can know everything. There aren't enough hours in the day. But what you do have to have is an understanding of how all of this information slots in together on a timeline and as an overview. So you look at the overview and okay, I need somebody who can do that, and that, and then you put it all together. And that's where it comes together. Get your specialist people, and that's also what Oak Island is great at doing. And I take my hat off to them. They are reaching out to specialists in their field, and bringing them in and hiring them full time on the island. And so they're speeding up research time by having this expensive equipment. It's phenomenal, and it's fun to see the new individuals on the island, who are helping to crunch the data with the objects that are being found. Yeah, it's just phenomenal what they're doing. So, anyway, I hope you appreciate this conversation. It is off the cuff, and if you're interested in further information about Royston Cave, there is more coming in the future. I've discovered quite a bit more about Royston Cave that is not out in public yet. I'm sorry. So I did an interview with Jeff Freeman, Jeff Free 906, that has some of that new content in that discussion. So you can find some of that new information if you go to his YouTube channel, JFREE 906 YouTube, and look up my name in his channel. So I did bring some new info out with him, not all of it, but some of it. So anyway, happy New Year to you and yours. Stay safe, watch your health, respect yourself, respect others. And thank you for being with me. And I want to thank my patrons for being with me. And I care about all of you very much. All right, be well. Thank you.